Hi and welcome to Lecture 8. In this lecture we'll talk about scopes. We'll talk about the default scope as well as the named scopes. So what the default scope is, let's say you know that most of the time you're going to be pulling data from a certain table in a certain way. So for example, in the same order, right? So let's say you always wanted alphabetically sorted, or you always wanted to be in a descending date. So you could specify a default scope that lets you enforce that without you having to specify it in every query. So for example, you could do, let's say when you do hobby.pluck by name, you get programming and then music. But let's say you want it in alphabetical order, so you could specify a default scope of order by name that basically says, well, order name, we already know what that is. That's just a way to tell Active Record to sort by name. So now when you do hobby.pluck by name, you get music and programming, which is sorted in alphabetical order. Now, if you ever decide to break out of that default scope, you could do hobby unscoped, and then you're back to whatever the database thinks it should give you back, which happens to be programming music, which is not in alphabetical order. Otherwise, it's going to automatically insert the order by clause, which you specified as part of your default scope. A more interesting scope is something called a named scope. So the other one is a default scope. You just specify it and it just applies. In this case, you actually telling it what scope you want to bake into your class, and it almost acts as a class method. So we actually so far haven't seen class methods used inside Active Record model, but so for example, let's say you want to search for many people. You would do person uppercase, which is a class method, dot, where, and so on, outside of a class. But you could also do it inside of a class. So for example, you could have a class method, let's say def, with self dot, let's say people of a certain age, and you could do those queries inside that method, and it becomes a class method, and instead of doing it outside of a class, you could do it inside of a class. So that's what scope is. Scope basically is a way to specify that you're going to be doing those kind of class type methods, meaning that you're going to be not just looking for things on this particular instance of your, let's say, created person, but you're going to be looking for through a whole people table with specific conditions. So for example, let's say you want to order by age. So you could have a scope that's called ordered by age, and it takes a lambda, which basically think of a lambda as just a block, as a Ruby block, something similar to that. And inside there you could say order by age in descending order. And you could actually even pass arguments to this. So for example, you want to have a scope that says starts with some kind of a parameter starting string with first name like, and you're using the array syntax notation here, as we talked about, to avoid the SQL injection, and you pass in the parameter of what that starting string is. So that's your starting with scope. So you pretty much could do everything you do with a named scope as a class method. The difference is that a class method could really return anything, and the scope has to return an active record relation. And the reason why we did that is that you could actually chain scopes. So you could chain, as we're going to see in a minute, you could chain your ordered by age, and you could chain your starts with. It essentially just becomes a more expressive way of writing your where clause. So for example, instead of saying person, where, order by age, and so on, or person, order, and by age using the active record, you sort of hide that inside the scope, order by age, and this becomes more expressive. So now it's person dot ordered by age, pluck age, and now you see that the ages are ordered. Great. And you could combine scopes, as I mentioned, because scopes, every scope has to return an active record relation. So you could combine scopes. So for example, you could say person dot ordered by age, and then give me the people who start with J and O, which is a parameter that you get to pass to starts with, as you do in this case over here, which under the hood gets really passed down to the active records where and the rest of it. And the last example we'll take a look at is actually combining the scopes and as well as the baked-in active record, in this case limit, right? So you could do ordered by age. Oh yeah, by the way, I only want 2 records to come back, and give me something that starts with JO, and pluck, and you could do multiple columns in the pluck. So you could do give me the age and the first name column. So that's what it gives you. It's ordered by age. It's only 2 records instead of 3, and you get 2 records back after this query using the named scopes, in this case ordered by age and starts with Joe. Pretty powerful stuff. So in summary, scopes always return an active record relation, and they're really just a substitute for class methods in active record, and you totally could not even bother with scopes and just write class methods if that's what you like, and that's totally fine. But they do make active record queries very expressive. But then again, you could just use them. You could just make your class methods names very expressive as well, and they will look very similar to scopes. What is next? Next, we'll talk about validations.